All right, good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, September 9th, and our topic for today is, Lord, prepare me to be a true worshiper. Although I love the topic of this, or I love the title of the chapter from today, I think it's more appropriately named How to Be Submissive, right? That was my takeaway. You know, in my experience with people, it seems like the word submissive just rings with a negative connotation in society. So I'm curious, before I dive in and tell you about today's topic, what do you think? Do you think the word submissive has a negative connotation to it? What do you think? And what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear that word submissive? Well, I can't hear crap out of you because your volume is down.
I think that it does hold in our society a negative connotation. I like words along that line that pop into my head are maybe like meek and weakness.
That's what I was gonna say. Weak. First word that came to mind. Weak. That's sad. Why do you think it holds a negative connotation, Linda?
Well, I mean,
or Michelle.
I think because it's how we've used it so much in society, television, movies, all of that, that it's associated with, being sexually submissive, being, what's the word I'm looking for? Obediently submissive, like to an abusive spouse or partner or something like that. It's bowing down and being weak and meek and giving in when that's not what you want to do, and that's to me a totally different meaning than the biblical meaning, and I think that, well, it reminds me of like how certain names or phrases are associated with certain things, like, we always use that phrase, what is it? Bye, Felicia, Or the new one is, okay, Karen, which I still don't know what that means. But it's not good. And so it's like, we can have one movie that has such an impact on people that it totally changes how we view it in society, like Rottweilers and from The Omen. Well, you guys might not know that movie, but anyway, that movie totally ruined, the breed of Rottweilers for society, so different things like that. And my adopted daughter, her first son, she named Damien, and this was back in the 80s, or not in the 80s, but in the 90s. And still everybody was like, oh my gosh, you can't name your son that, because that again comes from that movie, The Omen. And it was just such a, sacrilegious movie and just very satanic, all of that stuff. And she was like, whatever, she was young. And I was like, as sad as it is, they're right. There's people who are going to have an issue with that. So she names him Damien anyway. And sure enough, from the second that child was born in the hospital, and the nurses running their mouths about, oh, wow, why'd you name him that? And then friends, and I'm talking even people in law enforcement would tell her, you know what? No. She even had people refuse to call her son by that name, because they're like, nope, sorry, that's, sacrilegious, it's satanic, this and that. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So she started calling him by a nickname, Sean, and that's what he still goes by today. And the kid's like 19 years old. But his birth name's Damien. Well, and I'm like, isn't that so? Society has a big role in how we come to associate words. Sorry, I know I got off on a tangent there. And we've tainted that word submission so much so that it becomes a real source of conflict, I think, even when I try to talk to people who are Christians or have, try to live by the word, things like that. They're like, no, that's where they draw the line. They will not submit to their partners and things like that. So in this chapter, Stormy does a really excellent job, I think, of explaining why it's important. At least that was my takeaway, that there's only two rules that you need to live in this world and live, a Christian or a biblical lifestyle or Christian lifestyle. And lo and behold, I did read the wrong title for today's chapter. What the hell? So Michelle was right. The title is Lord, Instruct Me as I Put My Life in the Right Order. I still don't think it's the right title, but the two lessons the two rules that we only need to follow in this world, and Stormy calls them priorities. Get your priorities right so you can put your life in order. And that first one is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, or your might, depending on which Bible you read. It's the first and great commandment. The second one is love your neighbor as yourself. And everything else comes back to those two things. That first one, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. If you are loving God and following, the word and his path and his journey, because we were made in God's image, then you're making good choices. You're doing the right things. You're not going against God and you're not sinning and all of this stuff. So love God with all your heart. Second one, love your neighbor as yourself. If we are made in God's image and we love ourselves as we love God, then that's how we should be loving our neighbor. So if I beat myself up and tell myself what a dumbass and an asshole I am, then imagine saying that to my neighbor. Is that loving my neighbor as I would myself? Yes. However, it conflicts with rule number one. Rule number one, loving the Lord our God with all our heart, all our soul, and all our mind. We're not loving God and worshiping and showing honor when we're treating our neighbors like that or ourselves, because that goes against God's love for us, right? So I can twist that in any way, shape, and form. You only need those two rules in life. If you follow them, you're good. Right? So, and in that regard, the biblical submission is to surrender or submit so you can follow those two rules. It says in the Bible that wives, be submissive to your spouses. Spouses need to live in a godlike manner, and it clearly says, I don't know the exact words, but it clearly says that. So if our husbands or our spouses are they're loving their neighbor as they do themselves, and they're living in that godlike manner, they're not going to beat us up. They're not going to yell and scream. They're not going to insult us. They're not going to do all these things. So therefore, I should have no reason to not submit, because they're not going to ask us to do things that would go against God and against the word. Makes sense? There you go. I'm done.
Yes, Linda. I think a couple of the lines that really brought it into perspective for me is, because she's talking about, like you said, our priorities and getting our priorities straight in our life, which comes from God, right? And so that's where we have to be submissive to God's will. And so this line, it says, when you seek God first every day and ask him to help you put your life in order, he will do that. And that nothing in our life is random or accidental. So having this line is the one that really spoke to me, in just that describing of what submission actually is. Submission is something you decide to do, not something someone forces you to do. And having a submitted heart means you're willing to submit yourself and come into proper alignment in accordance with God's will.
And true, that's so true. And if I'm not willing to submit, come back to rule number one and rule number two. Am I not willing to submit to something that the word and God says that I should be submitting to? Or am I not willing to submit or let go of, that love your neighbor as yourself? If I keep treating myself against the word, but I love my neighbor, I'm not following rule number 1 or 2, right? So can I submit and let go of that need to beat myself up? And so Stormy makes a really good point in here about women being in abusive relationships. And I grew up with my mother having been in abusive relationships the majority of her life. And, so I got a really good firsthand view of what women go through in those kinds of relationships and why people tend to refer to them as submissive. But you know what? That's not being submissive. When you respond because you're afraid of getting abused, that's not submissive. You don't want to do that. You're protecting yourself. You're not being submissive. You're being a victim. And sometimes we are victims, but that's not submission according to the Bible. So, right up.
Yeah.
What do you think?
The other thing that I underlined in toward the end of the chapter kind of brings that to light, and like you said, ties it back to those 2 rules, where it says submission to others takes a heart that loves others as ourselves. So tying back into that second rule. And then when you love God first and others second, all the other priorities in our life fall into place and you'll be in the right order. So I feel like that just ties everything all together.
Mm-hmm. That is so true. So where do you draw the line? So my husband and I had a talk. We just happened to have a talk the other night, and this word came up. It wasn't the topic, but it was the word. And, he was telling me a story of growing up with his mom and dad, and he's the youngest of 6. And he was also a menopause baby. So his mom was like 45, something like that when she had him. So his parents were much older and so much older that his dad, Brad, my husband and I are about almost the same age. My father was in Korea. His dad was in World War II. That ought to tell you the age difference. And my father was, 36 when he had me. So that was,
Wow.
right? So his parents were up there. And his dad had a long history of having affairs on his mom. And who knows if she knew about the ones in the earlier years, but she definitely, there was no doubt about her not knowing, that she definitely knew about the ones in the later years of their marriage. And, Brad was telling me a story of not only did she know, but his dad would almost like flaunt them in front of her face. And it was long-term. It wasn't like he went out with a whole bunch of women at one time. He would have a long-term relationship, almost like a second wife, with someone else. And they also had a boat. So it was common for them to go out on the boat every weekend or this and that. And Brad said at one time he was a teenager and they went out on the boat and his dad brought his girlfriend and her child while his mom was with him too. So it was Brad, his mom, his dad, the girlfriend, and her daughter. And he's like, and my mom just didn't do anything. And he says, I was so mad at my dad that day. It was just awful. He was so traumatized by that. And how could somebody possibly do that? And so he said, definitely that solidified his view of his mom being submissive, and it's like, no, that's not submissive. That's a product of maybe abuse, psychological abuse, not knowing what to do because his dad certainly wasn't living by rule number 1, rule number 2. And so he's like, well, then what is submissive? That's just it. People don't know, we don't know what submissive is. So there you go. I say we start a whole new movement to change the meaning of that word. Hashtag submissive, right?
Oh man.
but I often ask myself when it comes to taking care of my husband, and maybe he puts demands on me or he asks me to do something, and I struggle because you know what, he's like taking care of 6 children sometimes. And you know, and I ask myself, or I get upset, it's like, oh, I really don't want to be doing this and this and that. But when it comes down to it, I do want to do that because I offer a lot of help to him. I help him with his life, which ultimately affects our lives. And okay, do I need to submit right now? And a lot of times that answer is yes, I do. I need to put my crap aside and submit. Tracy, I want some words of wisdom.
I have so many really good thoughts like going around in this head of mine right now about this topic. Hold on a second. I gotta drive and be safe. Okay. This is a really good topic, and I actually didn't think of this point until you brought up story about Brad's mom just now, and like what he remembers when he was a child, and it reminded me of my mom and how it means a whole nother meaning to me now, because I used to think, so my mom was sexually abused when she was young, and I've shared this with you ladies, I'm sure, before, but and I have always, when I've discussed this before, was always with the intention in mind that my mom is such a strong woman and has been such a hero for me in my life for certain reasons, and the obvious being that she never let that define her. She was sexually abused by her dad. And when she met my dad, she was young. She was 19. And my dad was the reason why she could have some closure with that and move on. She's a believer. We grew up Catholic, and she grew up, by the time she was a teenager, going to church every day. Not so much when they were really young, but when she got into her teenage years. And my dad wasn't. Like, he was when he was a young boy, but never carried that through when he got older, which is very interesting. That's another story. So I think, one, her faith, but two, my dad being the man that being the man that he was and how he was brought up. He really helped her develop some independence and some strength, and belief in herself. Because even though she really just threw herself into her faith, and was just very submissive to her faith and God, like to carry her through. That's what I would guess, describe it as. And then growing up, I saw them as my parents in a relationship where I felt like my mom, this is going to sound so bad, but this is the honest to God truth, so I'm being completely transparent. I felt like my mom was weak. Like, my mom never, like, she just was very submissive to my dad, like very just in that relationship. Like, she honored that relationship with my dad. She obeyed him, and in the all honest to God truth, loving ways, like not in the, oh, I'm gonna obey your husband, you think of it as in a negative way. But I took that as negative. I always thought, like, mom, like, kind of like, grow a pair of balls, ma, like, come on now, like this, like, that's how I would think of it. And I would always think, like, I'm not going to be that way. Like, I thought my mom and dad have an amazing relationship, and very loving relationship. But I took this submissive point of view aspect as the negative way. Like, my mom never could do anything for herself, or and this is in my mind. And it wasn't about that she couldn't. It was, she did, but she always obeyed that relationship for number one, because she obeyed rule number 1 and 2 of the Bible, of what God says. And you just made that a reality for me to understand it in that way. When you just described it like that, I was like, oh my God. Because my mom does have respect for herself. She would never do anything that my dad would never ask of her to do something that wasn't obeying that number one, number two, like like just made me see this in a whole other light and respect that I want to call my mom now and have a conversation with her.
Tracy, you're absolutely right that, when if my husband asks me to do something that goes against number one and number two, no, I got balls and I'm going to stand up to him. Absolutely not. Right. But most of the things that he asked me to do are in no kind of way in conflict with number one and number two, but
right.
Yep, you're absolutely right. But if there are times when he maybe expresses his anger to me or something that does conflict with number one, number two, oh yeah, big Linda comes out, just
Even so, Linda, like this is my mom, like which totally, she blows my mind. This is why I just like, she's my hero. If that were the case, 9 times out of 10, my mom would say, I'm going to let you calm down and I'll come back and have a conversation with you later. And she'd walk away. I'm like, oh, what the hell? I'd be like fuming, like, oh, hell no, we're going to talk about this right now. And we'll talk about it calmly. But my mom has such I don't even know, another level to her where I just look up to her. It's got to be her faith that she knows that it's not coming from a place of love and acceptance right now. So I'm going to walk away and we'll have it later. It's just like, my God. Goals. We got, this guy's ready to hop out of the car right now. I love you, ladies. We got to go to our appointment. This is so good. Pray for me. I love you all.
Oh, true that. My mother was, and I've talked a lot about my mom, that she was not, a highly intelligent woman for all kinds of childhood reasons. And she was in abusive relationships the majority of her life. But, the last 2 decades almost of her life, she was not in an abusive relationship. And she probably submitted to the Lord more than any one person I have ever known, because she often lived by, well, no, I don't, that goes against what I was taught to do, or that goes against what God tells me to do. She tried to turn her worries into prayer and all of that. And she submitted to the universe, essentially, to the environment, the situation. And I gave an example the other day of, her going to the zoo, and it was so far away from where we lived, and she lost her way. And all she did was just pray and say, God, if I'm supposed to be at the zoo right now, just help me find my way. And lo and behold, there's a truck with the zoo, and she follows it to the zoo. So those kinds of things, to me, those are examples of submitting to the situation, to the universe. It's not submitting to one person in general. It's just submitting to something greater than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's it. I could freaking write a book on submission.
Maybe you will. That'll be the start of our change of the expectations of this word.
Absolutely. All right. Well, how about we do a prayer?
Sounds good.
Make sure I'm on the right prayer today. There we go. Not that there's a wrong prayer. I just want to be on the prayer that matches the lesson. That's it. But before I do, I'm going to read Hebrews 13:17, that obey those who rule over you and be submissive, for they watch out for your souls as those who must give account. Let them do so with joy and not with grief, for that would be unprofitable for you. All right. Dear Lord, I pray you would help me set my life in right order. I want to always put you first above all else in my life. Teach me how to love you with all my heart, mind, and soul. Show me when I am not doing that. I don't want to have any other gods but you in my life. Show me if I have lifted up my soul to an idol. My desire is to serve you and only you. Help me to live accordingly. Give me a submissive heart. Help me to always submit to the governing authorities and the correct people in my family, work, and church. Show me who the proper spiritual authorities are to be in my life. Plant me in the church you want me to be in. Help me to move into proper alignment in every area of my life by willingly submitting myself to others where I need to do so. Show me clearly to whom I am to be submitted and how I am to do it. Give me discernment and wisdom about this. Show me anytime I am not submitted to the right people in the right way. I know that if my life is not in proper order, I will not receive the blessings you have for me. But I also know that if I seek you first, all that I need will be added to me. I seek you first this day and ask that you would enable me to put my life in perfect order. May I never come out from under the covering of spiritual protection that you have placed in my life. Dear Heavenly Father, I had never imagined that I would pray or ask for this request today, but I ask that you help me to be submissive in the areas where I need to be submissive. I know that I practice this, but you know what? When you practice something for a while, you get lazy, right? So I really want to take those times and those moments of turmoil in my life and look at it from that submissive viewpoint, following rule number 1 and rule number 2, especially to love myself as I would my neighbor and love my neighbor as I would myself, because sometimes I love me a lot. Also want to pray for my children today and every day, just keep them happy and healthy and help them stay on that right path. And I ask, you know what, that if they get off that path, you give them a gentle reminder and not a slap in the face, right? And also, I will do my part in helping to smack them around so that they stay in your path, right? I just want them to have less stress so that they can stay focused and do the things that they need to do. All right, Michelle.
Lord, thank you as I thank you every day for this beautiful day that we get to be alive and breathing and joining together in community with you. It's such a blessing to be here and start my day every day of the week with these ladies and just set such a beautiful tone to my day. Even on the times that I am tired, I know that this is such a beautiful way for me to wake up and start my journey focused on you and intentionally making those decisions and choosing to submit to your will, Lord. But I know that I am not by any means perfect in that. And so I ask that you allow me to continue practicing being submissive to you and your will and allowing me to grow in that journey. I want to pray for our girl Tracy. She's always such a light in our lives, and I am so inspired by her and by her relationship with Darren. So I ask that you continue to have your hand on them and allow them to grow in the ways that you know that they need to grow in together and as individuals. So I just lift them up to you and allow them to have a good, beautiful day. And I pray for Tracy and I, in hopes that she has this conversation with her mom, because I know that it is so powerful when you have realizations about situations in your life, and when things finally gain clarity through you and your word, God. So I just think that is such a blessing for her to have that realization this morning. I want to continue praying for our Mind Body Soldier tribe and community, that we all stay healthy and driven and determined. You have brought so much renewed energy into our team, God, and I am so grateful for that. I am really excited to see where you take that, and I ask that specifically within our planning for the women's retreat, that you continue to guide our path and our hands so that it will turn out to be the vision that you have planned. And just keep us healthy in this time as we are fast approaching that date. And while we are all traveling, I ask that you keep us safe and healthy, God. We bring all this to you, laying at your feet. In your name, Lord. Amen.
All right. Join us Monday through Saturday for life-changing discussions. And we are out.